She wasn't supposed to be there. That was the first thing Carlo Esposito noticed when the woman walked into the Valentino's private dining room. Not her face, not her dress, not even the way the candlelight caught the gold in her earrings. He noticed her presence. The way every conversation in the room stuttered, just slightly, like a record skipping. Dave noticed too. He noticed everything. That was how he'd survived 30 years in a world designed to kill men like him before their 25th birthday. His father had died at 27, his uncle at 29. Dave Romano had beaten both numbers by learning one essential truth: read the room before the room reads you. The woman was stunning. Light brown skin, the kind that looked sun-warmed even in winter. High cheekbones, a jawline like something a sculptor would lose sleep over. She wore a burgundy dress that said "I chose this carelessly," while clearly choosing nothing carelessly in her entire life. She moved through the room like she'd been somewhere more important before this and was being patient about it. Dave turned back to his wine. "Your speech is in 40 minutes, his consigliere, Marco, murmured beside him. "The Ferrara brothers are already seated at table 7. Don't look, don't acknowledge. We need them relaxed before you." "Who is she?" Marco paused, a dangerous pause, the kind that meant he was deciding how much to say. "Her name is Amira. She's 28, international trade consultant. She was brought in by the Castellano side as a neutral party for the port deal." "Neutral," Dave repeated the word like it tasted wrong. "Nobody comes to one of my events as a neutral party, Marco." "She came with Vincent Calabrese." The wine glass didn't move in Dave's hand. His expression didn't shift, but something behind his eyes recalibrated. Vincent Calabrese was the one man in the city who hated Dave Romano with both patience and intelligence, a combination far more dangerous than rage. Vincent had been trying to dismantle the Romano Empire for 3 years, not with violence, but with business. Contracts rerouted, alliances quietly poisoned, shipments lost to paperwork. And now he'd sent a woman into Dave's private event. Why? Dave finally looked at her again. She was standing near the east wall, holding a glass of sparkling water, not champagne, scanning the room with dark eyes that moved like a security camera. Methodical, professional. She wasn't performing beauty. She wasn't working the room. She was studying it. She caught him looking. She didn't look away. Most people looked away, even powerful men. Even men who thought they feared nothing, they'd hold Dave Romano's gaze for 3 seconds maximum before their eyes found something safer. A painting, a window, their shoes. This woman held his gaze for a long, unbothered moment. Then she took a slow sip of her water and turned away first, but not like she was retreating, like she'd seen enough. Dave set his wine glass down. "Find out everything," he told Marco. "Tonight." He did his speech. He worked the room, the Ferrara brothers, the port commissioner, 2 judges whose names never appeared in newspapers, a senator whose career Dave's family had funded since the man was still losing local elections. Dave shook hands and leaned close and laughed at the right moments and left every conversation with exactly what he'd come for. He was good at this. He'd been born into it and trained by grief and sharpened by the years of nearly dying and choosing not to. He didn't look for Amira again. That was intentional. You don't let a room see what you're tracking. But he knew where she was. East wall. Then near the bar, still with the water. Then a conversation with Luca Ferrara, the younger brother, 22, still hungry to prove himself. That lasted exactly 4 minutes before she smiled politely and stepped away. She shut him down. Interesting. It was 40 minutes later, on his way toward the private corridor where he'd meet Marco for a debrief, that he turned a corner and nearly walked into her. She didn't flinch. He didn't either. They stood 2 feet apart in the narrow corridor, and she looked up at him. She was tall, maybe 5'9", but he still had inches on her, with an expression that was almost amused. "You've been watching me all evening," she said. Her accent was American, East Coast, he thought, educated, no nervousness in her voice at all. "I watch everyone at my events," Dave said. "Differently," she replied simply. He studied her for a moment. Up close, she was more than beautiful. She had the kind of face that made you want to understand it, like a sentence you'd read twice without knowing why. There was something behind her eyes she was carrying. Not sadness exactly. Awareness, maybe. The look of someone who had stood in rooms full of powerful men long enough to stop being impressed. "Who told you to come here?" Dave asked. Something flickered across her face. Fast, gone. "I go where the work takes me," she said. "And Vincent Calabrese, where does he factor into your work?" The flicker again, slower this time to disappear. "You do your research quickly," she said. "I do it thoroughly," he corrected. "There's a difference." She tilted her head slightly, studied him the way she'd studied the room earlier, methodical, unhurried, like she was deciding something. "I think you're more interesting than your reputation suggests," she said finally. Then she stepped past him and walked back toward the dining room, leaving the corridor smelling faintly of amber and something floral he couldn't name. Dave stood still for exactly 3 seconds. Then he smiled, a real one, the kind Marco never saw, and pulled out his phone. She was lying about something. And he was going to find out what. The file Marco placed on Dave's desk at 7 the next morning was thin. That alone was suspicious. In Dave's world, everyone had a thick file. Even people who tried hard to stay invisible left trails, property records, old affiliations, dormant social accounts, names that appeared once in a police report and never again. Thickness was normal. Thinness meant someone had been intentional about erasure. Amira Osai, 28, born in Baltimore to a Ghanaian father and an American mother. Economics degree from Georgetown. 2 years at a D.C. trade firm. Then 3 years ago, she went freelance. International consulting. High-end clients. She'd worked deals in Milan, Nairobi, Singapore. "Why is there nothing before Georgetown?" Dave asked without looking up. "Sealed," Marco said. "Juvenile record, maybe, or just a family that kept offline." "Or someone who cleaned it." Dave closed the folder. "What's her relationship to Vincent?" "As far as we can tell, professional. He hired her 8 months ago for the port restructuring. She's been handling the legal architecture of the deal." "Legal architecture?" Dave leaned back. "So she's the one building the structure that cuts us out of the port contracts." Silence from Marco. "Say it," Dave said. "It appears so." Dave was quiet for a long moment. Outside his window, the city was doing what cities do in early morning, waking up slowly, garbage trucks and delivery vans, and the particular gray light that came before everything decided what kind of day it wanted to be. She'd walked into his event. She'd met his eyes and held them. She'd stood in a corridor with him and called him interesting and left with the calm of someone who had nothing to lose. Either she was extraordinarily confident, or she wanted him curious. He thought about the flicker in her expression when he'd mentioned Vincent's name. Not guilt, not fear, something more complicated. The look of a person navigating 2 versions of a situation simultaneously. "Set up a meeting," Dave said. "With Amira." "With Vincent, neutral location. Tell him I want to discuss the port deal directly." He picked up his espresso. "And don't tell him I know she's involved." She called him first. His personal number, which maybe 30 people in the world had, rang at 11 that morning, and the name that came up was a contact he didn't recognize. He answered anyway because he always answered numbers he didn't recognize. Information came from unexpected places. "I owe you honesty," she said without greeting. "I was sent to that dinner to assess you, not the deal, you." Dave didn't speak. "Vincent thinks you'll accept a reduced share of the port contracts if the offer is framed as a partnership expansion," she continued. "He wanted me to gauge how you respond to flattery, whether you're the kind of man who can be managed with the right amount of social performance." "And what did you conclude?" "That he's going to need a different strategy." Dave stood, walked to the window. Why is she telling me this? That was the only question that mattered. Loyalty switches in his world were never clean. They were always payments on something. Debts. Fears, desires. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. A pause, shorter than expected. Because I've watched Vincent work for 8 months, she said, and I know what happens to the people around him when a plan fails. They don't get to fail quietly. She's afraid of him. Not of Dave, of Vincent, which meant something had happened, something recent. Where are you? Dave asked. That's not relevant yet. Yet, he repeated. I'll come to you when I'm ready, she said. I need something from you first. Name it. I need you to behave normally for the next 72 hours. Meet with Vincent. Accept the preliminary terms. Smile. Let him think the plan is working. And what happens after 72 hours? Another pause, longer this time. Everything changes, she said quietly, for both of us. She ended the call. Dave stared at his phone. In 22 years of navigating a world built on calculated deception, he had developed something close to a sixth sense for people's intentions. A warmth or coldness he'd feel before his brain caught up. His instincts had saved his life no fewer than 6 times, twice from bullets, once from poison, 3 times from the subtler violence of betrayal. Right now, every instinct he had was telling him 2 contradictory things simultaneously. Don't trust her. And don't lose her. He met Vincent Calabrese for lunch 2 days later. The restaurant was Vincent's choice, a place on the north side, expensive and deliberately public, the kind of location that said I'm not afraid of you without having to say it. Vincent was 51, silver-haired, with the smooth confidence of a man who'd spent decades winning through documentation rather than violence. He shook Dave's hand like they were colleagues. I appreciate this, Vincent said. The port deal affects both our interests, Dave replied. It makes sense to talk. He watched Vincent's eyes, the small satisfaction there, the sense that his plan, whatever Amira had outlined, was proceeding on schedule. Dave performed exactly what was needed, attentive, slightly cautious, receptive. Amira wasn't at the lunch, but 3 tables away, at an angle she'd clearly chosen deliberately. A woman in a gray coat sat alone with a book she wasn't reading. Dave didn't look at her directly. But as he stood to leave, 90 minutes later, he felt her eyes on his back like a hand pressed between his shoulders. She'd been watching the whole time. Not him, Vincent. She was building something that required Vincent to believe he was winning right up until the moment he wasn't. Dave got into his car and told his driver to take the long route home. He needed to think. Because somewhere between a corridor that smelled of amber and a phone call that lasted 4 minutes, Amira had done the one thing his enemies never managed. She'd made herself necessary. Elena Romano arrived on a Thursday wearing a diamond ring and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She was 26, Italian-Swiss, beautiful in the architectural way of women raised on the understanding that beauty was infrastructure. Her family, the Morty family, old Milan money laundered clean through 2 generations of legitimate banking, had been aligned with the Romanos since Dave was 14. The engagement had been decided long before either of them had a say in it. Dave wasn't cruel to Elena. He wasn't distant. He was, if anything, perfectly adequate, attentive in public, respectful in private, honest about what the arrangement was. They didn't pretend it was love. They pretended it was partnership, which in his world was considered more durable anyway. Elena knew about his business. She knew about the violence in its history, the bureaucratic violence of its present. She accepted it with the composure of a woman who had been explained to from childhood that this is the world you are marrying into, and had decided, rationally, that its benefits outweighed its costs. She did not know about Amira. Neither did Dave, fully, yet. Amira came to him on a Friday evening. No announcement, no driver. She took a cab, which Marco noted with barely concealed confusion. She walked into Dave's private study carrying a laptop and a flash drive and set both on his desk without greeting him. This is what Vincent has built over the past 3 years, she said. Dave looked at the screen, spreadsheets, transaction records, shell company networks woven through 4 countries. This is the infrastructure he used to reroute your port contracts, she continued. 3 logistics companies that appear unrelated all trace back to a single holding entity registered in Cyprus. She pointed. Here. And you built this? Dave asked. She didn't answer immediately. She was looking at the screen, not him, and something in her expression had shifted from the carefully managed calm he'd seen at the dinner. She looked tired. Not physically, tired in the way of someone who'd been carrying knowledge that was too heavy to carry comfortably. I built the legal structure, she said finally. I didn't know what it was being used for, not fully. She paused. Until 5 weeks ago. What happened 5 weeks ago? She looked at him then, direct, unflinching. A man named Dario Mensa, she said. He was a port official in Tema, Ghana. He tried to flag an irregularity in one of the shipping contracts I'd helped design. He was killed in a car accident 2 weeks after he filed the report. The room was very quiet. He was Ghanaian, Dave said carefully. He was my cousin, she said. There it was, the weight she'd been carrying. Not just fear of Vincent, grief. Rage kept civil by discipline. She'd walked into Dave's event with a plan already forming, anger already converted into something colder and more useful. Dave looked at her differently now, not with suspicion, with something closer to recognition. Vincent had him killed, Dave said. I can't prove it yet. That's why I need more time, and why I need you to stay inside Vincent's trust until I can. What happens when you can prove it? I take it to federal investigators I've been in contact with for the past 3 weeks, she said. People who have been building a case against Vincent's financial network for 2 years and needed exactly this kind of inside documentation. She closed the laptop. He goes to prison. His network collapses. The port contracts revert. Dave sat with this for a long moment. And you? She looked at him steadily. I testify. I lose my career in private consulting. I probably spend 2 years explaining my own involvement to people who won't care about the distinction between designed it and intended it. A pause. I've accepted that. Something moved through Dave's chest. Unfamiliar pressure. He didn't name it. Why come to me? He asked. The federal investigators, why not just go directly? Because Vincent has a contingency, she said. If he suspects he's being investigated, there's a protocol. Documentation gets destroyed, witnesses get relocated or worse, and 3 very specific people receive packages that implicate me in everything. I become the architect of fraud. He becomes the victim. She sat down across from him for the first time since she'd arrived. I need the Romano network to intercept those packages before that happens. I need someone with reach that federal investigators don't have. Dave studied her face. She was asking him to use criminal infrastructure in service of a federal investigation. She was asking him to trust her. She was asking him, if he was honest with himself, to risk a great deal on the word of a woman he'd known for 72 hours. Why do you trust me? He asked. She almost smiled. I don't, not completely, but I know what you lost when the port contracts disappeared. And I know you're smart enough to recognize that taking Vincent down through legitimate channels protects you from the cleanup operation the Ferrara brothers are planning. Dave went still. What cleanup operation? She reached into her bag and placed a single photograph on his desk. It showed the Ferrara brothers at a table he recognized, in a restaurant he owned, taken by the angle from inside the building. Sitting across from 2 men from the Calabrese side. That was taken 6 days ago, Amira said quietly. While you were performing loyalty to both sides, someone decided to skip the performance. Dave looked at the photograph for a long time. Then he looked at her. She'd saved his life, possibly. Without telling him she was doing it. And she was sitting across from him now with tired eyes and a dead cousin and a plan that required her to sacrifice everything she'd built. I'll need 48 hours, he said. She nodded, stood, picked up her laptop. Amira, he said. She paused at the door. I'm sorry about your cousin. She didn't turn around, but he saw her shoulders shift, just slightly, just once before she walked out. Elena called that evening, her voice light and warm, talking about the wedding venue her mother had visited in Tuscany. Dave listened, said the right things, looked at the photograph on his desk. 48 hours felt like a very long time. The next 36 hours moved like a storm that hadn't decided to break yet. Dave activated 3 separate teams, quietly, without a paper trail, using the kind of communication channels that had no digital footprint and required men who still remembered how to operate on instinct rather than instruction. He gave each team a fragment of the task. None of them had the full picture. That was how you kept operations clean. The packages Amira had described, Vincent's contingency, were tracked to a courier service operating out of a warehouse in the industrial quarter. Dave's people confirmed their existence by Tuesday morning. They were scheduled for delivery in 71 hours. Meanwhile, Dave attended 2 more meetings with Vincent, smiled, accepted a preliminary term sheet for the port restructuring. Let Vincent pour him wine and talk about the future of their partnership with the particular warmth of a man who believed he was already 3 moves ahead. Dave had always found it interesting, the way people telegraphed their confidence. Vincent's sentences had gotten slightly longer, his gestures slightly broader. He was performing the beginning of a victory, savoring it in advance. He doesn't know yet, Dave thought, but he will. Amira came back on Tuesday evening. She looked different, not worse, tighter, like she'd spent 40 hours compressing herself against something. She stood in the middle of his study and gave him a precise, professional update. The federal investigators were ready to move the moment she provided the documentation. Her contact, a woman named Reyes, from Financial Crimes, had confirmed the intercept protocol. If Dave's people could secure the contingency packages, the entire sequence could execute within 24 hours. And the Ferraras? Dave asked. Your instinct was correct, she said. They've been promised a 40% share in the restructured port operation in exchange for neutralizing you. The timeline is, she hesitated. Tell me. 3 days, a public event, something that looks like business gone wrong rather than a hit. Dave absorbed this without visible reaction. He'd been in danger before. The specific quality of this danger, organized, political, clean, was more sobering than the kinds that came with shouting and guns. Violence you could feel coming. This kind arrived in a suit, smiling. I'll need to move faster, he said. So will I. They looked at each other across the desk. Something had changed between them over the past 72 hours, a gravity that neither had named or acknowledged, built not from attraction alone, but from the particular intimacy of knowing someone's damage and watching them move through it with precision anyway. Dave thought about Alina in Tuscany, sending him photographs of a venue with cypress trees. He didn't let himself think about it long. There's a gala Thursday, he said. Vincent will be there, the Ferrara brothers, everyone relevant to the port deal. I'm expected to attend with Alina. Amira nodded slowly, understanding the implication. If the packages are secured by Thursday morning, Dave continued, Reyes can move on Vincent that evening. His network collapses publicly. The Ferraras lose their guarantor, which neutralizes their timeline. That's a very narrow window, she said. Yes. What do you need from me at the gala? He looked at her carefully. I need Vincent to believe, until the moment Reyes walks in, that he's won. Meaning you need to be there, with him, playing your role. She was quiet for a moment. He could see her calculating, not the logistics, she'd already done those, but something else. Personal math. All right, she said. Thursday arrived like a held breath. By 8 that morning, Dave's team had the packages. 3 of them sealed, addressed. Rooted to Reyes by a method that wouldn't be traceable back to Dave's operation without 2 years of forensic accounting, enough distance to survive scrutiny. He sent Amira a single word by 11, done. Her reply came back in 40 seconds, ready. The gala was at the Mancini Gallery, a fundraiser for a children's hospital that both the legitimate and illegitimate halves of the city attended each year, the 2 worlds performing coexistence with practiced grace. Dave arrived with Alina, who wore ivory and looked like every photograph ever taken of her, which was the particular gift and curse of her kind of beauty. She touched his arm lightly as they entered, and he covered her hand with his briefly, and it felt like the kindest lie he'd ever told. He scanned the room within the first 3 minutes. Vincent, near the sculpture installation, working a small circle of city officials. The Ferrara brothers, separated, one near the bar, one near the exit, which was a positioning choice that meant something. Reyes, whom Dave had never met but recognized from a photograph Amira had sent, standing near the catering staff in a blue dress that didn't quite fit the event, nursing a glass she wasn't drinking. And Amira. She was with Vincent's group, burgundy dress, different from the first night, same commanding ease. She was speaking to one of the city officials, and Vincent had his hand lightly at her back in the way of a man demonstrating ownership of something he hadn't earned. Dave felt something cold move through him. He managed it. 40 minutes passed. He worked the room. Alina talked to people she knew and radiated the warmth that Dave sometimes genuinely admired in her. She was good at people, genuinely good, in a way he'd always been more calculated about. His phone vibrated. Marco, Ferrara East exit, 10 minutes. They were moving early. Something had tipped. Dave had exactly one play left. He crossed the room. Alina was nearby, too nearby. He didn't look at her. He looked at Amira, who had just separated from Vincent's group and was standing alone for the first time all evening, and when she met his eyes across the room, he saw that she understood. The timing had shifted. They were out of margin. He walked to her. She turned to face him fully, and he reached up and took her face in both hands, and she kissed him. She kissed him, her hands gripping his lapels, a full and unambiguous and public kiss, right in the center of the gallery, right in front of the room, right in front of Vincent Calabrese, whose hand had been on her back 40 minutes ago. Right in front of Alina. The room didn't go silent. But it shifted. That record skip again, the same one from the first night. Vincent's expression fractured, not from jealousy, from miscalculation. He'd read Amira wrong. He'd read Dave wrong. The plan he'd been executing for weeks had just detonated in his face in a room full of witnesses. And in that fractured, disoriented second, Reyes moved. Alina's face was very still. Dave saw it from across the room as he stepped back from Amira. That stillness, not betrayal, which would have been violent, something quieter, something that looked disturbingly like recognition. Like she'd been waiting for exactly this moment to arrive. And somehow that terrified him more than the Ferraras ever had.